All right, 2 o'clock. I'm going to get started. For those of you that have done this before, this information is going to be reviewed kind of right off the bat. But for those of you who are new, welcome. It's good to see you again. Um, all attendees are in listen only mode. Within your Zoho meeting portal, you should have the ability to do Q&A or chat in questions. I do have that Q&A window open, so if you have questions at any given point in time, I will review them kind of as you put them in, or I always allow for questions at the end. Today, what we're covering is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts: mobile streaming and specifically live broadcasting protocols across different technologies, different software companies, different social media platforms. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a review in terms of what streaming is, how it works, making sure that we're using terminologies that are familiar to everybody and that we're all on the same page with the terminologies that are being utilized, and then get into some specific examples. And for those of you that are new, the reason that we are doing it this way is today's presentation will be focused on what I would consider to be more just informational stuff. There's nothing Z-band specific that you're going to get today. I may reference how we implement things in a couple of different examples, but for the most part, this is just industry knowledge. And then next month's webinar will be a specific product that we have that deals with this industry knowledge and the information that deals with RTMP, RTMPS, that kind of stuff. So today will be more informational, and then next month in June we'll do product-specific stuff, and we've been doing that all year. So that it's worked out well for us in terms of being able to introduce concepts and then deal with something specific that Z-band does, what that concept is put in. So just a couple of things right off the top for review, because they're going to be kind of required information, background information, as we're talking about RTMP and RTMPS and live streaming in general. Is there's more, but there's two basic things that we always want to talk about when we're talking about video streaming. And that is the compression, which is how are we actually describing video, and transport protocol, which is how are we moving it from A to B. What's important to note here is that from the compression side of things, the way that the compression standards are written, they are written around the decoding devices, the television, set-top boxes, those types of devices, so that those decoding devices will have a common language or a common set of information that they're expected to understand. There is no actual protocol on compression algorithms and how compression is written, as long as the decoder can understand what's being written in the compression algorithm. So what that does mean is that there is variance from manufacturer to manufacturer to manufacturer on how exactly this video is described. Not just because you put H.264 compression on something and your high vision doesn't mean that you're putting the same H.264 compression on something as if you're like Teradek, right? The standard is the same. The decoder is going to read them the same way. If you look at the metadata in VLC, it'll say H.264, but the actual details of what goes on within those compression algorithms can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer to manufacturer. So you will see slight differences in video quality, latency, processing capability, that kind of stuff, just based on who actually wrote the compression algorithm and where that product came from. Um, Transport protocol is a little bit less variance, right? A transport protocol is a networking protocol, and so it has to work across all switches, all devices that would be using or trying to route that same protocol. So there's not really variance there. You don't get to write your own UDP protocol for H.264 transmission. But when we talk about these things, I do want to make sure, and we'll reference it a couple of times throughout the presentation, compression is actually how we're describing the video so that the decoder can understand it, or so that the television can understand it. And then the transport protocol is how we're moving that video from A to B. And both of them are going to be relevant as we begin our discussion of how to do live streaming, specifically live streaming to CDNs. So what that looks like in this environment is, and I only have, should have drawn a couple of extra lines there. Yeah, there we go. As we're adding in information in a unicast environment, you can see my first end user out here is going to request a stream. Boom, they get that. Then my second user, PC, is going to request a stream. This is going to come all the way back to the source to watch this same bit of content. Let's assume everybody's watching, it's baseball season, and I'm an Orioles fan, and they're doing decent this year, so we're going to enjoy that. Let's assume everybody's watching an O's game on Masson. Don't enjoy Masson as much as I enjoy the O's, just for transparency. Every copy of this Orioles game gets duplicated, replicated from our source content here to our first router. So as you can see here, bandwidth is additive in this unicast scenario. So in this unicast scenario, every device that wants to get a copy of the Orioles broadcast is requesting its own unique copy of that Orioles broadcast, and that gets added up on your network backbone and then throughout your system of routers as well. Let's go ahead and laser pointer that so you guys can see what I'm looking at. So you can see, um, from the source, now we have 5 copies of this for each of our 5 destinations. When we're looking at a multicast environment, that's not what happens, right? My first client requests their information, and that never it doesn't get duplicated on the network backbone. All you really end up with is, rather than the scenario that we were in before, is I have technical difficulties with my red lines appearing right now. The switch themselves are what actually do the packet level replication. So what you would in effect see is one red line here for your baseball game, your Orioles game, one red line connecting these two for your Orioles game, and then a unique red line for each of these viewing devices rather than stacking up like they did on the previous slide. And the reason that I'm pointing that out and the reason that this is important is because what we're dealing with in RTMP and RTMPS is a unicast environment. Anytime that we're talking about live streaming to the web specifically, you are talking about a unique connection between, there we go, um, your device and the source device, right? You're talking about one unique connection versus in this multicast broadcast environment, what you get is not a unique connection all the way back to the source, but you get just a connection to whichever switch or whatever had the local broadcast packets that is closest to you. Maybe it's this switch, maybe it's a core router, maybe it's a rendezvous point. Really kind of depends on your network architecture. You can see the difference here where now, since the network architecture itself is doing this packet level replication, we're doing significantly less bandwidth impact on our system. And so obviously significantly less bandwidth impact on the backbone. So when we are talking about everything that we're talking about today, we are going to be talking about that unicast environment. So we'll get into some concepts of adaptive bitrate streaming and a centralized server or centralized architecture hosting content. And the reason for that is because anytime that we're doing this live streaming, specifically this live streaming over the internet, we are talking about unique connections between devices. And what this actually ends up looking like to you is a pretty simple architecture from the broadcast side of things. The delivery side of things out to the end user is actually really complicated, but the broadcast side of things is pretty straightforward. You're going to have your camera or your source, whatever that happens to be. That's going to feed into your video encoder. That video encoder is going to leave the premise of your building. This is my fancy firewall here, and go out to the cloud, to Facebook. So from a broadcast side of things, all you're really concerned about is like, what's my source, what's my encoder, and what is my destination. And if you have those 3 pieces of information, you can absolutely set up a live stream and begin doing your live broadcasting without really needing to know anything else. And I'm going to go in and specifically show this from a Facebook side of things that we guys have. that as a specific example as to what you're looking for. But really, when you're actually setting up the broadcast itself, the broadcast is pretty straightforward because we're talking about some common protocols and some things that don't require special network configuration. So camera, which is our source or whatever your source happens to be, set top box, new tech TriCaster, whatever you got. Into an encoder, broadcasting out, or this can be software based as well, just for full transparency. You could do like a OBS, something like that. Um, really any sort of like desktop recorder that allows you to push content out as well. And so when you're talking about Facebook specifically, and when I do my examples today, I'll use Facebook and YouTube and Twitch as the most common kind of reference points because they're the ones where we see this most of the time. Um, what you end up seeing is this transport protocol that they utilize called RTMP or now RTMPS. And it's really funny. RTMP was actually originally developed to work with Flash, and nobody uses Flash anymore because we went, it's just another add-on or plugin or whatever else that you need to utilize in your system. And with the advent of a lot of modern browsers, right? When we started going away from Internet Explorer and those types of browsers to more Edge, Chrome, Firefox, which are HTML5 based, but HTML5 has its own methodology, which we'll get into in just a little bit, for viewing live content that didn't utilize Flash, that didn't utilize RTMP. Um, so RTMP kind of waned. It was created in the, I think, late 90s, early 2000s for video viewing. It was developed to work with Flash. It had this like moment in the sun where that's what everybody was using, right? How many times did Windows tell you you need to update your Flash player in order to view this content? It was like a regular error message in the early 2000s and 2010s. And as that's gone away, we've moved towards um, HLS and MPEG Dash and some other stuff. So what you actually end up with is normally these hybrid environments that we'll get into in just a second. But I'm gonna pop out of this real quick and then show you guys from a Facebook standpoint exactly what you're looking for. So this is the Z-Band Facebook page here, Z-Band Technologies Facebook. And if we want to broadcast a live video, we're just going to go into live video here. And Facebook is going to have questions because it wants to know, are we going to do an event? Or are we going to send out an invitation? Or do you just want to kind of go live now and do your thing? So we're just going to go live now. We're going to do what we want to do. Joys of the internet. And then rather than use a webcam or anything that's embedded, because I want to show this information to you guys, we're going to go streaming software. If you select webcam or you're broadcasting from your phone doing Facebook Live, something like that, you're actually doing all of the same stuff that we're doing now. It's just automated and it's presets in the application rather than making selections like we're doing at this point in time. So I'm going to select streaming software, and you're going to get 2 bits of information. You're going to get a stream key. This stream key is going to be unique for your stream, for your broadcast. This is a unique identifier that allows Facebook to say, okay, I see this source broadcast coming in. Ooh, and this stream key is embedded in the broadcast. Because I know where the stream key goes, I know where to broadcast it. What's not going to be unique, let me expand the advanced settings here, is the server URL, right? This URL is going to be the same for all Facebook broadcasts because all you are doing is pushing out an RTMP stream to port 443. We'll cover that in a second because that's a secure port. And that Facebook address. So basically, every broadcast or almost all broadcasts that you see on Facebook, your live video, anybody that's going Facebook Live, is streaming to this same server URL. And then Facebook is using the technology behind the scenes to decide how exactly to route that content and where to post it and where it should go. So when I say from a broadcasting standpoint, you as the source of the content, you don't need to know very much about how this works. This is what I'm talking about. All you really need to know is this Facebook URL, this stream key, and then that's it. That's all you need to know to be able to go live on Facebook with a Facebook broadcast. On the back end side of things, Facebook has to do quite a bit more than that. But those are the two bits of information that you need to know in order to actually do a Facebook Live broadcast. And YouTube and Twitch and those, they're all very similar in what they're looking for. They're all giving you a unique URL to broadcast to, and then a unique stream key so that you can identify your bits of content. And when we go next week and actually, or next week, next month, and actually show the Encode LS, we will do this. We'll set up a live stream, we'll set up the Encode LS, we'll broadcast with the Encode LS, and you will most likely get to see my smiling face from our dance studio. Yeah, our dance studio. I tell my daughter has her recital this weekend. Too much ballet on the brain. So now that that's set up and we know how to broadcast to Facebook, well, what does Facebook do with it from there is really the question. And that's where we start to get into some of these complications of live streaming because there's no true standard in the industry. Like I said, uh, RTMP was developed to work with Flash and some of the earlier video viewers for live content. Then Apple developed HTTP live streaming, which we call HLS, and that was developed to be able to stream to iPhones, to be able to stream to Macs and MacBooks, and has since kind of taken over and is the go-to for mobile devices. MPEG, who does H.264 and MPEG-2 and H.265, and a lot of the linear video compression for your standard broadcast television, has tried to get in on the act with what they call MPEG-Dash, which is dynamic adaptive streaming, but it also uses HTTP as the protocol, the same way HTTP live streaming does. Um, Haivision has SRT, Secure Reliable Transport, which they developed and is an open source transport protocol for low latency video broadcasts and video distributions. And of all of these options that you've got here, whether you have HLS or HTTP or SRT, none of them are actually a standard that work across all devices at all times. So you end up with these really interesting, like odd looking architectures where we have a hybrid of all of these things that come together because they each have their own issues as well. I'm going to go back to my laser pointer. Speaking specifically to Apple and HLS, and then also the way that MPEG Dash is designed, these two are designed, and what they do is they chunk up the video into bursts, let's say 4-second bursts of packets. And so then they'll send the 4 seconds of HLS, the receive device will auto negotiate whether or not it received all of the packets that it's supposed to. If it missed some, it'll send back to the host server and say, hey, please resend some of that information. I missed stuff. But this process of chunking the video up into predefined segments and segment lengths increases latency, right? Like with HLS, you will absolutely never have latency or system delay less than 4 seconds because it chunks up the video into 4 second segments. So you can never be lower than 4 seconds with HLS. With some of the HLS that we've seen, and depending on your network, you can actually end up all the way into 30 seconds plus. Um, MPEG Dash has some of the same limitations where you're chunking up this video into predefined segments and predefined lengths, so you can never get your latency lower than that. SRT is developed to not do that at all. It's made for low latency environments. And then RTMP kind of falls somewhere in the middle where there is some latency to it because you're doing web streaming, but it's not necessarily doing these predefined chunked where there is no minimized latency or minimum latency that you can't get around just due to the codec. So what you end up with a lot of times that you're doing these live streaming architectures, whether this is internally or whether this is something that you're doing yourselves, is you have your source. We have our camera here. That's going to hit an encode LS and get broadcast out. We're going to do RTMP or RTMPS transport out to the LAN. And then that stream will hit the cloud, and that'll be Facebook, Twitch. It can be an internal source, whatever that happens to be. But really, what you end up with is once this RTMP stream or once this RTMPS stream hits Facebook or hits YouTube, Then it goes through this just incredible process of being stored and transcoded and chopped up, so that users with a variety of different devices can actually access this content. And I want to stop here for a second because I've said it a couple of times and haven't actually defined the difference. Um, RTMP, this real-time motion that was developed for Flash, that was when we first started working with it even a couple of years ago, a port 80 protocol, right? So it's just going over kind of a standard HTTP port. There was nothing on it that was keeping that content secure or unique. So both Facebook and now YouTube as well have made the transition to RTMP-S, which rather than just your kind of standard RTMP, RTMP-S actually pushes all of the content through port 443, which is there's a secure SSL connection between your broadcast source and the actual receive device that is capturing that content. So we did add a layer of security here to RTMP with RTMPS as it's been making the comeback. So what that helps you do is it helps you prevent things like spoofing or someone taking over your account and broadcasting erroneous information. So RTMP S does have that added layer of security. And then the great part about HLS and MPEG dash and SRT, uh, the two HTTP based ones, MPEG dash and HTTP live streaming, since they're using HTTP, there's security inherent in HTTP transport protocols anyway. So they're utilizing that, and then SRT, secure reliable transport, uses 128-bit encryption on the content itself as a security measure to make sure that the content can't be interrupted as it's moving between point A and point B. So all of the major players in the industry or major players with the live broadcasting capability have added a level of security as well. That security allows you to get your broadcast out to the cloud. Once it's out to the cloud, this is kind of where the where the magic happens, and it goes into. I think I referenced it on a previous slide. There is now a series of video servers. You can. I don't know the crowd that I have on here today, if it's a folks that have watched Silicon Valley and can picture a server farm that way. I don't know if you've gotten like a tour of one of the Switch facilities in Grand Rapids or Las Vegas or something like that. Can picture a server farm that way. But for Facebook and YouTube, you're really then talking about you have sent your content to a specific destination, but it's really just this massive server farm that's sitting somewhere, Vienna, Virginia, or Texas, or wherever the server farm happens to be, that's then taking that content and it comes in as RTMP, and then it gets parsed into HLS. It'll get parsed into MPEG dash. It'll get parsed into uh, you have the ability to do SRT with some stuff. But basically, what Facebook server farms do or YouTube server farms will do is they'll take that content and now make it available to a multitude of devices. And if you're doing this internally, this is where things get a little bit tricky, because not only do you have to create this broadcast like we're doing here, but you have to design this part of it as well, which then becomes how many. This is one of the questions that we get asked all the time. So I'm just going to back up half a second here. How do I make my live video content available to mobile devices in a corporate environment? And this part right here, creating the content and actually getting it back to a server, that's the easy part. The difficult part, and it's kind of the part where we end up asking a lot of questions that sometimes don't get answered, or where the client decides to drop the idea, is designing this part of it. Okay, I've got this live stream. Now, what do I need to turn it into? Do I need to turn it into HLS so that clients can view it on their iPhones, their iPads, their Android devices? If the answer to that is yes, about how many users do I have in my corporate environment, right? Because I need to know how many unique connections I'm expecting in order to design a server that's going or series of servers that's going to be able to host this content? Um, is it a are we viewing it over a good network or a bad network? Like, where's Wi-Fi kind of are there places within the building that are not great for Wi-Fi? Because then I need to design this with a multitude of different profiles. Maybe to call back to the slides earlier, I broadcast everything at 2 megabits per second, but I've got 180 potential mobile device users throughout the building. The building's kind of in terms of Wi-Fi. It hasn't been upgraded in 5 years. So if I got 180 unique connections back to this server at any given point in time, I need to have a number of different profiles available in terms of what that bit rate and video quality is going to look like. And you've all seen this. This is Netflix 101, right? You start to watch what have I been watching lately? The Righteous Gemstones. You start to watch The Righteous Gemstones, and that first 3, 4, 5 seconds of whether it's HBO Max or Netflix or whatever is you get the bar there and it's saying, okay, we're loading the content. And it goes 1%, 5%, 12%, 72%. Okay, you can watch the content. And what's actually going on there is this process called adaptive bitrate streaming, where the Netflix server that you're communicating with is sending packets back and forth to your Roku device and deciding how much bandwidth is actually available on that pipe. You have a 750 megabit incoming link to your house, and then that runs into a Google Home system, which will support 400 megabits of streaming data. So the Netflix server or the HBO Max server says, okay, cool, I can send you a full 4K stream because you got plenty of bandwidth available. But that initial negotiation, that handshake, that's what you see with the percentages jumping around at the beginning of any kind of like streaming content that you're viewing. That same process applies here if you're designing a completely internal system, except you have to be the person as the system architect to set it all up, which is where things get really complicated. How many different profiles do I need? Do I need a 480 profile and a 720 profile and a 1080 profile and a 4K profile? Do I need to take the content all the way down to 360 resolution or lower because I've got like a really lossy network or an old Wi-Fi network? So this portion of things is really where, from like an architecture and design standpoint, we start to lose clients when we talk about they want to do live viewing of mobile content within their own local area network. Is because we start to ask a bunch of questions like this, and they just they don't have the answer, or if they do have the answer, it's cost prohibitive to put a bank of servers in so that they can host potentially 3,000 different mobile viewers. But from a creation standpoint, which is what we were focused on today with the RTMP stuff, that part of it is like the simple part when you're actually doing content creation and live viewing. It it becomes a simple part of a bigger ecosystem that utilizes all of the protocols that we talked about today, right? You're going to use your RTMP to get the content out there. And then once the content's out there, because we don't know what that viewing device is going to be, you're going to have a server or a transcoder, both, that's capable of HTTP live streaming, that's capable of MPEG dash, that's capable of maybe even stuff like SRT or WebRC or some of the protocols that are out there with like a smaller footprint. Maybe it'll do just basic RTP for Android devices. So there's this part of things is where the variance happens to come in when you're designing your own system for live streaming. Um, and I did spend a chunk of time on that at the end. The protocols are actually kind of fun because there's only 3 or 4 of them. But I've been trying to keep these to a half an hour. I'm right about 30 minutes on the dot right now. I actually thought that one would be a little longer than that. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A in your Zoho window. If there are no questions, then I will stay here for another minute or two and then head on out. Or if you can't find the Q&A in your Zoho window, you should get a follow-up email from our marketing department, and you can reach out to Chad or to your account manager or to me directly. either way, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have right now or anything that you come up with in the future. So I'll give it a minute or two for questions to come in. Right, I don't see anything coming in. I will say that in June, what we'll be doing is actually doing this live. No PowerPoint presentation. It'll probably be a reasonably short one where I'll break out our Encode LS and I will show its capability to stream concurrently to Facebook, YouTube, and another CDN of our choice. I guess I'll have to set up a Twitch account or something like that so that everyone can watch me play Legend of Zelda. And yeah, in June, that's exactly what we will do. It will be my smiling face walking through exactly what this live broadcast looked like, from the setup on the social media side of things to the setup of the encoder, and then a broadcast from our studio. So hopefully, if you sat through this one, you will come back in June to see it in action and put all of these like underlying transport protocols and information into production. Thank you all very much, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks.